Hey everybody, KMO here with another Out of My Head video. And in this one, I want to acknowledge, appreciate, and respond to some feedback that I've received on some of my videos in the past week. So we're going to start with Sunday's video, which was about Andrew Yang. And Yang Gang, this will be the first of 3 videos. It will be the only one that involves Andrew Yang, so after this you can safely check out. So on Sunday morning, I came out of the bedroom, and I said the usual phrase that I say to get the smart speaker to play the morning news. And on the NPR news headlines, not only did I hear a mention of Andrew Yang, which is very unusual for NPR, they had been, in lockstep with the corporate media in terms of, not talking about Andrew Yang or his policies. Not only did they mention him, but they actually played tape of him talking. That was striking, and I wondered what was going on. And I made a video in which I said, I wonder what's going on. I wonder if there has been some behind-the-scenes negotiations and possibly Andrew Yang has been courted by, one of the mainstream candidates as a possible running mate. And I thought, well, who would it be? The only one who really is at all close to Andrew Yang in terms of concerns about the Fourth Industrial Revolution and automation and technological unemployment, well, that would be Joe Biden. And I've noticed that Andrew Yang, in the past, whenever he mentioned Joe Biden, he would say, my friend, Joe Biden. So he was obviously maintaining not only good relations with Joe Biden, but also in his public statements, making it clear that he and Joe were friendly. I thought, well, maybe that's going on behind the scenes, and the corporate media, including NPR, has been given secret marching orders. The narrative on Andrew Yang is changing. He is no longer, in the blackout list. He is a person of interest. He is a piece in play. Treat him as such. Well, that video picked up a lot more attention than my usual videos do, and I got a lot of comments from Yang Gang members. I'm going to read a few of those now. Michelle says, lol, just say no. G-Tech says, no way. Blademaster Z916 says, I don't think Yang should take any spot, but an outside advisor, or he risk running himself for future run. And Catherine writes, I cannot imagine it. Biden is an unimaginative and stagnant part of the establishment past. We want to move forward, don't we? Alma writes, Yang will get the nomination. Anyone who listens to Yang on the long-form interview converts into Yang Gang. And she also posted, Yang leads in the polls. Don't be fooled. The internet polls are the most accurate, and Yang wins those. Lorraine writes, I will not vote for a corporate-owned candidate. To be specific, I will not vote for the following corporate-owned candidates: Biden, Warren, Harris, Buttigieg, etc., etc., etc. Raymond C. writes, Yang is a leader, not a follower. Besides, he's a lot more intelligent than Biden. Just listen to all his ideas and policies. Biden will move the country backward for sure if elected. Mount Sir writes, no way. My guy has to be the prez. We need freedom dividend. Quadruple exclamation point. Zambot writes, nobody disputes Yang low poll numbers right now. And Lily Prairie Moon writes, Biden is talking to Yang. I suspect others are considering him for VP. They would have to change their platform. He's not running for ego. He's running for results. And Jess, a longtime C-Realm podcast listener and a regular commenter on these videos, writes, tapping Yang for VP would be a brilliantly savvy move by Biden. And that's exactly why I don't expect to ever see it, lol. Plus, VPs don't get selected until after the primaries are over, and I personally don't expect Biden to make it that far. Yang just biding his time. Ha. Steve H. writes, far-fetched. You misinterpreted everything. Biden is corrupt. Yang is not. Bad matchup. And R.W. Smith writes, the only person Yang would be VP for is Tulsi Gabbard. In addition to those sorts of comments, Tricia, along with other people, pointed out an interview that Andrew Yang did with the Washington Post. So I'm going to play just a very short clip from near the end of that interview. The interviewer is Robert Costa.
Let's say you don't win the nomination. You have said early on in this interview you would support the Democratic nominee. Would you be open to serving on the Democratic ticket?
Of course. I'm not someone who's had some crazy native desire to be president of the United States since I was a kid, because I'm not insane. I'm a parent, I'm a patriot. I just want to help solve the problems of this era. I believe I can do that best as president, but if that's in some other capacity, I'll be there.
Who on that debate stage is closest to you in terms of your view of the world?
I will say the only person who's taken me aside and said that we need to really worry about the fourth industrial revolution because it could potentially tear our country apart is Joe Biden.
Would you serve on a Biden ticket? You said you were open to anything?
I'm definitely open to working with Joe. We've actually talked about it.
So there you have it, folks. In no uncertain terms, Andrew Yang says, yes, he would be willing to run as Joe Biden's vice president. I'm so wrong. I have misinterpreted everything completely. Yeah? All right, so that is it for the Andrew Yang coverage in this video. If that's all you're interested in, now is the time to take off. But, you're welcome to stick around. I'll be talking about peak oil, artificial intelligence, and the collapse of industrial civilization for the rest of the video. All right, so I put out a video in which I talked about how peak oil is not going to come soon enough or have the effects necessary to prevent the development and widespread application of artificial intelligence technology. To which Noah wrote, at least AI can theoretically live without a biosphere, and that seems to be where we're heading. No, that's really not where we're heading. As Lynn Margulis liked to say to Charles C. Mann, the animals, the plants, the insects, the fish, the birds, these are just the dust on the top of the icing on the cake of life on Earth. Most life on Earth is microbial. Some of the largest organisms on Earth are mycelial networks underground. Fungus, bacteria. This is the bulk of living matter on Earth, and humanity, human technology, human industrial activity, none of that is going to eliminate life on Earth. None of that will denude the Earth of its biosphere. Should all so-called higher life forms, and by higher we mean big, the ones that we look at, think about, interact with, if they are all wiped out, life will continue, and more complex, large, macroorganisms will develop again in the future. When people talk about saving the Earth and saving the world, at best, the best, most noble interpretation of that sentiment is they want to preserve the current diversity of biology on the planet. But for most people who say that we need to save the Earth, what they're talking about is we need to save human techno-industrial civilization because it's what we know, it's what supports us, it's what we are. When people say we need to save the world, what they mean is we need to save ourselves and our familiar way of life. Barry Sharp writes, I thought by the title of this vlog that you were going to reveal a wonderful new source of energy and resources that would drive all the hardware that AI requires once oil and all the other rare metals aren't around. Well, first of all, no, you didn't, Barry. You're being sarcastic. And secondly, we don't burn the rare earth minerals that we put in our electronics. We don't make any great effort to recycle and reuse them because it is cheaper just to continue mining them for the time being. Should we ever reach a point where it costs more to mine new rare earth elements for our electronics than it would be to, take apart our old obsolete stuff to recover the component materials, then we'll finally get around to implementing that circular supply chain. But we are not burning those minerals. They don't cease to exist simply because they have been used in one piece of technology. And this is something that I think is not very well understood or appreciated by doomer types. You talk about the materials and the energy required for information technology. If you have an iPhone 5 or, Android equivalent, which is to say not the most current model, not, the absolute cutting edge, state of the art, if you're carrying around a piece of tech at that scale, you have in the palm of your hand, literally, this is not an exaggeration, more computing power at your disposal than NASA had when they put humans on the moon for the first time. Your pocket supercomputer runs much faster than all of their computers, has way more memory and processing power, but is a tiny, tiny fraction of the size, uses a very small amount of materials compared to the room-filling computers of the 1960s and 1970s, and even the 1980s, and uses a tiny, tiny fraction of the energy. Part of the process of the advancement of information technology is that not only does the hardware get faster and more powerful, but it requires less energy to operate. So, the scaremongering about rare earth elements are so rare that we're going to run out of them. Before that happens, they will have to get so rare that it's even economically viable to recycle them. Right now, it isn't. Paul writes, why don't we focus AI on education rather than entertainment? Part of what I don't like about technology is our implementation. Well, I wish that, the major decision point was whether to focus on entertainment or education. I have been re-listening, I think for the third or fourth time, to a book called AI Supremacy, Winning in the Era of Machine Learning by Daniel Wagner and Keith First. This book is right at the edge of being too dense to really take in as an audiobook. Certainly it's too dense to take in on one listen. But as I say, I'm on my third or fourth listen now. And yeah, AI does have applications in entertainment and education, but really what's driving the intense investment in and advancement of this technology are, financial and military and social control agendas. Optical character recognition and facial recognition, along with huge data collection and sharing between security agencies in China is already shaping up into an Orwellian nightmare. I don't think that the suite of technologies and techniques that the Chinese Communist Party is developing to control their internal minorities and to squash any incipient rebellion, revolt, or, ideological dissonance, I don't think that technology and those techniques are going to stay in China. I think that everything that develops there in terms of, techniques for social control is something that we here in the West will eventually have to contend with. Also, another huge driver of investment and development in artificial intelligence is military. The Pentagon, China, Russia, basically every country in the world that has a military is racing to develop autonomous weapons. Because in a drone battle between a remote piloted drone and an autonomous drone, the autonomous drone wins. And if, a big piece of military hardware, which is very expensive and hard to manufacture and resource intensive, if it is vulnerable, well, why not make 1,000 of them instead of just one and have them be very small and swarm rather than, just be this single juggernaut type entity? Well, does that mean you need 1,000 pilots for those swarms? It would if you didn't have AI. So yes, I wish it were a competition between education and entertainment. Egon Aram writes, very interesting topic, but near impossible to predict. Yep, I agree. I guess the question is, will there be electricity after peak oil? The infrastructure is not being built fast enough to secure the grid, so maybe not. Well, what do you mean after peak oil? Conventional oil production peaked in the United States in 1970. It peaked globally in 2005. We are after peak oil right now. That's peak conventional oil. In terms of total hydrocarbon energy, we are just beginning to tap the stuff that requires 21st century technology to access. So-called conventional oil, while it is a tiny fraction of the total amount of hydrocarbons underground, it was the stuff that you could access with 19th century technology. Basically just drill a hole in the ground and the pressure that the oil was under would drive it to the surface in a gusher. Once that pressure was no longer sufficient to drive the oil to the surface, well, then you could pump some water down there to increase the pressure. And those two technologies kept us happily pumping oil for a century. Well, that super easy, tiny minority of so-called conventional oil is gone. But in terms of peak hydrocarbon extraction from the ground, we have a long way to go. Will there be electricity after peak oil? If you're talking about peak conventional oil, well, obviously, yes, because it peaked over a decade ago and the lights are still on. Or if you're talking about, total hydrocarbon energy, well, don't worry about it. We will have transitioned to something else long before we exhaust all the hydrocarbons in the ground. And finally, Valhalla56 says, agreed. I try to explain this to people and they just don't get it. Well, here's the thing. If you claim that information technology, ubiquitous surveillance, electronic social control, machine learning, big data, that none of this is ever going to amount to anything worth thinking about because we're going to run out of energy and the techno-industrial infrastructure of our society is going to collapse out from under us, well, really that's just mental laziness. Peak oil and collapse in this instance are basically just your get-out-of-jail-free card. I don't want to have to think about complicated, unfamiliar topics, and insisting that collapse is right around the corner gets me out of having to think about that. And so long as mental laziness is a thing, there's going to be a lot of people who are willfully oblivious to the implications of information technology because it's complicated. And a lot of people who are very unhappy in the current situation do fantasize about collapse. Which takes us to the next video. Surviving collapse of industrial civilization. Unlikely for any one of us. One person who stands a better chance than most, I would guess, at least from his comment, is Thomas, who writes, I appreciate your prior videos on anti-doomerism, and I appreciate your anti-survivalist rant. However, there is a lot of space between the status quo and utter collapse, and I think a possible future calamity would lay in that space. And let me just pause there and say I absolutely agree with you, and I have said as much elsewhere. Continuing, Thomas writes, the Soviet Union during World War II did not collapse under the massive strain of the German invasion, on top of internal genocidal purges and the effects of the prior Great War that immediately transitioned into a massive civil war. Sure, there was death, famine, and violence, but it was not civilization ending. In World War II Britain, as Hitler attempted to starve Great Britain with a U-boat blockade, the place to be was the countryside, where a person could grow a victory garden to supplement their rations. I learned gardening from a survivor of the Cambodian genocide and subsequent wars. One aspect of what he attributes his survival to was his ability to grow food. He was viewed by the authorities as someone who could feed mouths, not another mouth to feed. He still has a huge garden around his home. His wife could drive a truck and was seen as an asset, not a liability. My buddy from Slovakia lived there during the Soviet era, which tended to include rationing and shortages. He still holds his grandmother's old homestead in high esteem with its pigs and chickens. I would guess we in the United States are more likely to see an economic depression or our own personal financial collapse as a manifestation of whatever ails our society or ourselves. In that case, gardening and small livestock is a nice supplement to what tends to be more affordable starches. Which is to say, pasta, rice, things like that are very cheap, but they're not nutrient dense. Thomas continues, I personally have tried to disintermediate myself from whatever stands between me and my needs to a reasonable extent. I learned to garden and am planting an orchard to reduce my grocery bill and eat fresh organic food. I try to maintain a reasonable diet and exercise to minimize my need for a doctor. I have learned basic auto mechanics so I can drive, fix, and select used cars for a fraction of the price of new vehicles and avoid costly mechanics. I heat my self-renovated cottage with wood from my property, so I always have heat and do not have oil or big propane bills that destroy finances in the winter. I am a carpenter by trade and am rebuilding the cottage I live in to reduce its energy usage. Has doing this included hard times, sacrifice, and frustration? Yes. They are ongoing. There are still pieces missing, but my lifestyle is less susceptible to outside forces than it once was, and if no such calamity occurs, I have reduced my life's overhead to where I will either save more of my earnings or not have to go out and earn extra in the first place. Well, kudos for you, Thomas. I think not only are you in an enviable position in terms of your lessened reliance on the techno-industrial infrastructure to meet your basic needs, but just having acquired all of those skills, this is self-cultivation. You are a more cultivated, more well-rounded, better realized human being than most of us. And let me just say, I don't know much about automotive mechanics, and it has cost me. I am definitely at the mercy of mechanics. And because I don't have much money and tend to drive pretty old vehicles that do break down, if it breaks down far from home and I'm at the mercy of whatever garage the AAA, tow truck took me to, they don't know me from Adam. They have got me over a barrel. And I have been over that barrel repeatedly. It sucks. Pat, SKS, writes, when civilization collapses, the world's 440-plus nuclear plants and their 1,200 cooling ponds for the spent fuel rods will melt down and bathe the earth in radiation. Prepping will not save you. We will all die. Well, you said one true thing there, Pat. We will all die. And Andy writes, I get the impression that a lot of these peak oil/doomer types oppose things like abundant, cheap generation for nuclear energy because they'd rather their fantasies of future scarcity be vindicated than actually avert disaster. Unfortunately, I think there is a large element of truth in that statement. All right. Well, there were many other very good comments to all of these videos. I didn't get to all of them. And apologies to the Yang Gang folk. I stopped reading the new comments to that video a few days ago. They just proliferated beyond my attention span, I'm afraid. And if you are a Yang Ganger and you've stuck around to the end of the video, well, thank you very much. I hope that if the non-Yang content was of interest to you and you haven't done so already, that you will subscribe to this channel. Everybody who's made it to the end, if you would, please click that like button. It does help, or so I'm told. And if there is anything that I have said here that you think would be of interest to people that you know, do share the content with them. I would very much appreciate it. All right, I will talk to you all again tomorrow. Stay well. And for C-Realm Vault podcast subscribers, thank you very much for your patience. I will get to work on a Vault podcast this afternoon. Stay well.